The Big Debt Catastrophe, defined by Ray Dalio, SW version. Lately, there has been so lot spoken about the economy, debt, inflation, and the bubble. And for these of us who don't seem to be acquainted with economics, the total dialogue can be pretty intimidating. However, these of us who apprehend what the economic system is know that is sincerely now not as tricky as you can also assume it is. So let me begin with the debt cycle. You know, in 1945, we started out a new world order. In 1944, we created a new economic system, the Bretton Woods economic system. And then we created that new world order, and that created bull markets in shares and the American world order, for the most part. There's a cycle that we're used to in which each time you have a harmonic downturn, the central financial institution hits the gasoline and can create that enlargement, and that produces an enlargement in demand. And it takes place in 3 phases of the cycle. Normally, it is hobby rates, you decrease hobby fees, and the economic system turns up. But when you get zero activity rates, which befell in 1932, we had zero hobby rates. So let me give an explanation for that. Sometimes it can be a little bit challenging to hold close precisely to what Dalio is getting at. I'm no longer totally positive if you are conscious of this or not, but we have had a pandemic over the previous and a bit. This pandemic has produced a number of things, consisting of enterprise troubles, job losses, and a struggling economy. And this, in the flippability, we're in one of a lot of cash from the governments. So the authorities say, let's understand the situation. When there has to be a lot of promotion of bonds, and bonds do not provide any precise return, there's an assured terrible return in bonds relative to inflation. And there are a pile of human beings who very own bonds. And this isn't always simply Americans, however. These are global buyers proudly owning bonds. And they have to purchase a lot of extra bonds due to the fact when the authorities have to promote a lot of extra debt, that skill they have to purchase a lot greater bonds. There will now not be adequate demand for these bonds. When that happens, hobby fees rise, and the central financial institution is put in a dilemma. So this reasons a large predicament for each of the governments and the Fed. No one wishes to purchase their bonds, and if no one buys them, then the authorities do not have any cash to supply out and then the financial system dangers a collapse. So, how it impacts you, what occurs when it all goes incorrect, and how we can forestall some other monetary catastrophe in this quintessential time in the world. On a very simple level, the financial system is definitely a transaction. When you pay your rent, this is a transaction. When you go grocery shopping, it is a transaction. When you go out for a fancy dinner, it's a transaction. So the Fed can both enable this danger to happen or can print cash and purchase the bonds themselves. The problem, if they do the second choices first, you chance the devaluation of the greenback due to the fact you inserting greater bucks into the gadget, and due to the fact there is more, they end up well worth much less. And secondly, you danger inflation. Does it pique your interest? Add your ideas in the remarks part beneath, and then make positive to subscribe to our channel, so you do not pass over out on any of our future uploads. So now let's take an example. Think of the economic system as being like a man or woman, and their pulse is losing when the pulse is dropping. The physicians come going for walks in with the stimulant, and they inject stimulants. Now that the financial system is rebounding, inflation pressures are rebounding. There's now no equal stress to administer that stimulation when it happens. When it will become a hassle is first, the rising activity prices begin hurting monetary asset costs first. Typically, they harm bonds, then they pass by through and harm shares due to the fact nevertheless hobby fees have an effect on stocks. And when that begins to have an effect on stocks, it really is one thing. As Dalio said, perhaps we see a 10–15% correction in the Federal Reserve can tolerate us. But after it has long passed through bonds and it is long gone via stocks, the subsequent stage is it begins hurting the financial system due to the fact human beings assume as an alternative to spending this cash in the economy, I can simply keep it at a greater rate. They assume I'm no longer going to borrow as lots due to the fact charges are higher. So I have to pay greater on my money owed, and consequently, they borrow much less and put much less cash into the economic system, and the economic system receives hurt. And so you've got receive this element, the place bonds get hurt. Let's strive to recognize the key phases performed via Fed with recognition of previous events. So there's a couple of phrases that we want to get our head around, 3 key phases. Just be aware of these. The first is when the Fed decides to carry hobby quotes down or shut it to zero. Now this is the place financial coverage 3 comes in, and the Fed starts off evolved working with the government's fiscal coverage and financial coverage alignment. The Fed buys authorities' debt, and the authorities make use of this cash to provide for human beings and businesses. As Dalio says, that is the late cycle of an expansion. That's what's riding the markets and the financial system now. Is this the remaining puff earlier than we see the cease of the cycle? No one be aware of, however, as Dalio says, we may witness it in the coming months.